So now it's time to configure our many-to-many relationship so that our users can attend activities. And what we'll do first of all is we'll create a join entity. And inside our domain, I'm just going to create a new class and call it user activity. And if this happens and you try and create a new class in this way and it fails, then what we can do is just go to our C# extensions, disable it, and then just re-enable it, and this will typically resolve the problem. And I'll try again and try a new C# class and say user activity, and this time it works. So what we're going to do here is create our properties inside this class, and we want a string, first of all, for the app user ID, and then we want to specify the app user and call it app user. And then we want to specify the other side of this relationship, which is going to be the GUID for the activity ID. And let's bring in system for the GUID. And then we want the activity and the activity. And what we can also do inside this join table is add some additional properties specifically for the attendees of activities. And we'll just add a couple of extra properties here. And one will be a date time, which is going to be the date they joined the activity. And the other one will be a Boolean to specify if they're the host of the activity. And this is going to act as our join table. And we won't see the app user inside this particular join table. Entity Framework is convention based, so it will recognize this app user ID belongs to app user, and it will just use the app user ID as the table column for this particular relationship, and same for the activity ID here as well. And what we also need to do is let our other entities, the app user and the activity, know about this user activity join table. So let's open up the app user, and what we're going to do here is add a collection. So we'll say iCollection of type user activity, and we'll call it user activities, and we'll also need to bring in system collections generic. And that's defined the relationship inside our app user class. And we also need to do the same in our activity class as well. So let's open this. And what we'll do is just exactly the same thing. We'll add a property of iCollection of user activity. And we'll just call it user activities. And once again, just bring in the system collections generic into this. Now, because this is a many-to-many relationship, what we also need to do is configure this inside our data context file. So let's head over there. So what we'll need to do is add another DB set, and we'll call it user activity and give it a name of user activities. And this will be the name of our table inside our database. And we also need to provide some configuration for this. And what I want to do is define the primary key, and we also need to define the relationship inside our onModelCreating method as well. So let's do both of these things. And first of all, we'll create the primary key. So we'll say builder.entity and user activity. And what we'll do, we'll start with the key. So we'll say x.hasKey, and what we want to do is make this up of both the app user ID and the activity ID. So I'll say UA goes to a new object and anonymous object, and we'll say UA.app user ID as the first part of this key, and then the UA.activity ID as the second part. And let's just reformat this to clean us up. And what we also need to do is define the relationship here. So I'm going to say builder.entity, and once again user activity. And inside here we're going to say that the user activity has one, and then I'll say u.appUser, and we'll say with many a and a.user activities, and then we'll say has foreign key, and we'll point this to the u.appUserID. And we also need to define the second half of the relationship as well, because one activity can have many app users, but also the app user can have many activities. So let's also define this, and I'm just going to copy this down and just reformat. And we want to do the opposite for our activities. So the user activity can have one activity with many user activities with a foreign key of the, and I'll just change this to A. Not that it makes any difference, but it just cleans things up a little bit, and I'll say the foreign key is a.activity ID. And this is our relationship now defined. And what we want to do now, because we've added a new entity and we've added some new configuration into our onModelCreating method, what we need to do now is create a new migration. So please make sure that your API server is stopped before attempting to do this. And what we'll do is say .NET EF migrations add, and we'll say user activity added, and then we'll specify the persistence project as the project where our data context lives, and the API as our startup project, and we'll press return. And this should successfully create the new migration. So let's go and take a look at what it's created. And if we just go and take a look at the migration class, what we find is that we're creating a new table called user activities, which has 4 columns, and we've got our app user ID, our activity ID, the date joined, and is host. And what we also have is our constraints for this particular table, and we're creating our primary key based on the app user ID and the activity ID. And we have 2 foreign keys, one that goes back to the activities ID column, and the other one that goes back to the ASP.NET users ID. And we're also using the cascade delete option in here, which is by default if we don't specify a different method of doing this. And what this means is that if the parent of this foreign key is deleted, as in an activity is deleted, then this entry inside our user activities is also deleted. And the same applies for our user as well. If our user is deleted, then this cascades into our user activities table. And that's the behavior we want in this particular case. So now that we have this relationship configured, what we're going to do next is take a look at our create activity method, because we want the person that creates the activity to be the host of that activity, and of course there'll also be an attendee of that activity as well. And we'll take a look at that next.